My name is Olivier Mascaro. I'm working on my PhD in the supervision of Dan Sperber at the Jean-Nico Institute in Paris. And for the moment, I've been working in the field of developmental psychology to study the mechanisms of epistemic vigilance. So, what is the general framework? The general framework is a basic evolutionary problem, the problem of deception in communication. That is, from the point of view of the speaker, the capacity to manipulate his audience, his mind, is part of what makes communications adaptive. But on the other hand, if deception prevails in communication, then communication should disappear. In the course of evolution, so since we continue to communicate, we must have specific cognitive mechanisms to deal with the problem, the occurrence of deception. And following the suggestion made by Dan Sperber, one can assume that these mechanisms assume a function that is best described as epistemic vigilance. If you like, the occurrence of deception or the communication of misleading information in the course of human communication is a relatively infrequent and predictable event. So you have to continuously monitor what is communicated to you in order to detect and avoid to trust deceptive messages. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is to study the development of these cognitive capacities. So for the moment, I mainly developed a psychological approach, which was based on mainly experiments. And for the end of the presentation, I will also suggest some directions of research for social sciences, and I'll submit a social hypothesis for explaining the developmental course of epistemic vigilance. Okay, so now one way to test the development of the capacity to be vigilant towards deception is to submit children with testimonies, because testimonies are mainly, if you like, the basic are a communication instance where the evaluation of the source is particularly crucial. And what was manipulated in this particular experiment was the benevolence of the characters, because, of course, the benevolence is the dimension which is correlated with the tendency to deceive. So the children had to discover the content of a box, and they were presented with two characters. One was said to be kind, and one was said to be mean. Both characters received perceptual access to the content of the box, and they provided contradictory testimonies about what was in the box. So the other one should have spoken, but there was a problem in the slide. Okay, so the children, so for example, the giraffe would say there is a fork, and the frog would say there is a spoon in the box. The children was asked to select between the two testimonies, and after that, he was also submitted a non-epistemic test, and he was asked whom do you ask to give you a gift? Okay, so basically, on this particular test, I tested 3 to 5 years old children, and the result was that even by 39 months of age, children were able to trust consistently the good guy. And what was interesting is that if you separate the children which are taking the good guy's gift and the children which are taking the bad guy's gift, that is, you're separating children who are actually paying attention to the disposition of the characters from the children who are not really paying attention to the disposition of the character, you can see that only the children paying attention to the dispositions of the character are actually selecting the testimony, actually passing the testimony test. Okay, So there was a significant interaction between these two conditions. So there was, from this experiment, one can infer a first mechanism for preventing to believe deceptive messages, which really relies on non-epistemic processes. It's just basically a preference for interacting with benevolent people. So this kind of mechanism can be expected, for example, to be evolutionarily ancient, just because it allows to avoid enemies, so it is particularly important in the environment of any kind of species. Okay, to go a little bit further in the understanding of epistemic vigilance, we did tests where children had to actually understand that what was communicated to him was false. So, to remove the potential interpretations in terms of preferences, I designed a test with only one character. The children had to find a sweet in one of two boxes, and it was explicitly told to the children that the puppet who was going to provide information to him was a big liar. Okay, now, okay, so then the character provided a testimony, and the children had to actually infer that if the giraffe was a big liar, then if the giraffe said, for example, that the sweet was in a green box, this message was false, hence he had to infer that the sweet was in the other box. So the testimony question was basically, where is the sweet? And on this particular task, there is a very clear developmental pattern from 3 years old to 4 years old. That is, 3 years old consistently trusted the big liar, whereas 4 years old were able to be vigilant. So this second experiment indicates that, to pass this second experiment, children had at least to understand that what was communicated was false. So they had at least to have some grasp of the notion of misrepresentation. And this is interesting because they passed this task before actually passing false beliefs. So if you take, in a sample of 4 years old children, you take only full belief failures, they actually pass the big liar test. Okay, but this experiment does not actually indicate that, to pass this experiment, it wasn't necessary to understand what mind manipulation fully entails, because children did not have to represent the intention of the character to actually deceive, but it could simply understand that the big liar was providing false information. So to refine a little bit further on the understanding of the processes of epistemic vigilance, we designed a novel experiment in which the character, which was similar to the big liar test, but in which the character was said to be very naughty, and it was simply indicated that he does not want the child to find the sweet. So basically the structure of the experiment was the same, except a small interview was added. So it was asked to children which box did the frog tell him to choose, and also where was the sweet actually at the end of the test, and also if the frog lied or if it made a mistake. So the testimony test was repeated 2 times. Then the children received feedback on the actual location of the sweet, and then he was submitted to the interview. So the results showed a developmental pattern from the fourth year of children to the 6th year of life. And in this particular development, which was most crucial, was the shift from 4 years old to 5 years old, because you shift from a group of children who are mainly believing the naughty character to a group of children who are significantly vigilant. Okay. So, and there was a clear difference also between these two groups in terms of interview, that his 4 years old did not actually remember that frog showed the wrong box, whereas 5 years old did, and they also were unable to say that frog lied, so they were perfectly at chance in saying that frog either lied or made a mistake. Okay, so I'm going to take this experiment as good evidence that by the age of 5 years old, children are able to understand that malevolent intentions can be expressed through mind manipulation, and that they are treating the intentions of communicators as a relevant input for assessing their epistemic trustworthiness. Okay, so from these experiments, one can infer that there are mainly two ways of to epistemic vigilance. The first way, which has been evidenced by the mean versus nice experiment, which might be evolutionary ancient to allow us to avoid enemies, and which seems to be genetically precocious. For example, there are experiments by Kuhlmeier, Wien, and Bloom showing that by 12-month-old children are able to attribute dispositions, so it is perfectly plausible that by this age they are also able to prefer to interact with people that are deemed to be benevolent. And there is a second road to epistemic vigilance, which directly targets the problem of deception, and hence might be much more evolutionarily recent and probably human-specific, and which develops around the 4th year of life of children. Okay. So now I'd like to interpret this developmental course in the context of social interactions. And I would like to stress a very important social event in children's life, the moment they are actually leaving mommy, that is, they are shifting from a very close relationship with the mother, which is also a person sharing their evolutionary interests, for the moment they are leaving their mommy, for an extended social world, where people do not share their evolutionary interests to the same extent, and where are potentially prone to cheat. Okay. So the analogy for this is basically a phenomenon also observed in developmental psychology, which is called food neophobia. That is around at about the period solid food is introduced in the diet of children. They start to display food neophobia, but it reaches a peak. That is, the diet breast is really reducing importantly from 2 to 4 years old, and then there is a climax in food neophobia from 4 years old to about 7 years old, and then it reduces again at later ages. And this kind of mechanisms also assume a function of protection for children, because if you look at the percentage of poisonings, for example, in children, you can see that there is a relation between those two dimensions. Okay, so by making this comparison, I do not claim that the development of epistemic vigilance towards mind manipulation is necessarily this developmental course is necessarily innately determined. It might be possible that children, when they receive input from interactions with cheating people, start to initiate epistemic vigilance. So there is a need basically for prescriptural research on the onset of epistemic vigilance, and also on the relation, the moment when children are actually shifting from a very close relationship to with the mother, with a more autonomous behavior. And also further, another direction for future research, much more on the psychological side, is to compare the acquisition of capacities to be epistemically vigilant and of the capacities to be more generally vigilant towards cheating, not only in the domain of communication, but in more general terms in the domain of cooperation. Okay. But actually, I'm done. Okay, so thank you for that.
Very nice paper. I have a comment and then a question. So the comment is Karen Wynn and Kuhlmeier and their colleagues actually already have the data that you speculated about, which is they now are doing, they're helping and hindering experiments with 3D toys. They're all, they're on a stage, and they give the child a choice between, and the children absolutely avoid choosing or touching the hinderer.
Okay. Yes. No. I have heard about this experiment, but one step further would be to see that if they would trust significantly the benevolent character over the malevolent character. So
right.
That would be a way to see if they use this kind of preferences
right.
in the domain of communication.
Oh no, I agree.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, right. It's related to your gift choice, but not your other gift. My question is this. I didn't quite understand the last, the analogy with the food preference example. So the question, I mean, clearly other people have noted the relation between understanding deception. I think the best work is Beatisodians, and it's not an accident that it's the same time as theory of mind, even by your analysis, even though you didn't have a correlation with false belief, still 3 to 4 shift is exactly bang on the right age. So are you suggesting that the developmental changes in children's understanding of theory of mind are related to leaving mommy? That is...
Okay. 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 So yes. Okay. I can just speak about. I have a couple of slides for the topics, but one, I was puzzled by the results. I was just trying to investigate which were the cognitive bases, the cognitive changes underlying the maturation of epistemic vigilance, and what good candidate, of course, is the development of theory of mind. But first of all, there are a set of tasks showing that, for example, the famous task by Cognition and by Argent,
sure.
Yes, showing that very early children are developing capacities to somewhat manipulate false beliefs. And so, but there was also alternative interpretations in terms of cognitive capacities, which are often used to explain the results on standard false belief tasks. For example, the development of capacities to take perspectives, or the development of capacities of inhibitory skills. But I would like to defend an alternative stance on this particular development of vigilance. I'd like to say that instead of children acquiring the cognitive power to pass the test, they are shifting their way of investing cognitive resources. So, for example, that would be that they are starting to develop an interest in epistemic vigilance matters. And I have some data supporting this fact. If you take 2 experiments, a big liar test and the stupid turtle test, which is exactly the same structure, so that is exactly the same requirements in terms of theory of mind capacities, perspective taking capacities, inhibitory skills, then you have a slightly different developmental course in these 2 tasks. That is, by the age of when children are reaching 4 years old, they are able to pass the big liar test, but only old 4 years old are passing the stupid turtle test. So that suggests that if you're more or less activating the epistemic vigilance, then children are reacting differently. So
assumption. I'm not quite sure whether this assumption is what you are actually making. That you know, the first 3 years you are mostly trustworthy parents, so there's not much need for vigilance. The vigilance comes when it's basically experientially triggered, when you are kind of. There is some evidence, like if you have older siblings, you pass the force belief tasks faster because they cheat on you. Okay. However, there is also another type of evidence from attachment research where, first of all, disorganized attachment that is actually significantly predicting dissociative personality disorders is most often found in very often found in abusive parents and in parents who are actively mourning during the first year or two of so they and these people are dissociating themselves. So what's common in these two is that there are unpredictable periods of unavailability of the parent or non-responsiveness of the parent that cannot be controlled by the child. And these people become very vigilant in terms of external cue monitoring, but they are not, they actually do show some, at least some reduced ability or lateness of theory of mind. And on the other hand, securely attached children show us, you know, half a year of earlier appearance of the passing of the false beliefs. But in fact, they are the more predictable ones. Of course, there are a lot of other factors that, for example, they're most likely to do more perspective taking or more, I don't know, pretense games. So you know, but in terms of the predictability and trustworthiness of the parent, you would expect that you would get later appearance of epistemic vigilance, while when there's a great deal of unpredictability of the parent, then you would predict earlier epistemic vigilance. But I don't think that the data is actually going that direction.
Okay. As I said, I'm not sure that the developmental force of epistemic vigilance is innate, but it is a plausible hypothesis that it is actually innate, that there is not much variation in the normal development of children across different cultures, across different social structures, or across different relationships with the mother. So the relation that the data you are alluding to, I mean, might be interpreted in other terms. For example, if parents are less attached to children, okay, there might be a general developmental delay, for example, in variative tasks, but this might not be directly linked to the problem of epistemic vigilance. It can be actually taken as an evidence that maybe the development of epistemic vigilance is quite universal.
Is there anything known about when kids start lying by saying they make a mistake and they say, I didn't do it, in order to protect themselves from being punished by, say, by the mother? Do we know anything about when really kids start doing this, actively inducing false beliefs in their mother, for example, about having done something like breaking
there are several experiments in this line showing that children are able to plead non-guilty. For example, you say you don't have to touch this specific toy, and you leave the room, and then the toy is very attractive. The children is touching it, and you come back and you say, did you touch the toy? And a significant proportion of maybe 3 years old children would say, no, I didn't touch it. But it is unclear whether they are using forced representation of false belief in the adult, or if they are simply pleading non-guilty, avoiding punishment.
Just to say, there's a guy actually in Belfast doing research on tattletailing behaviour in children that may be interested and may be related, because when children tattletale on another child, they say that the child did something on purpose, or that, so it may be of interest to you, maybe some of to look at what age tattletailing starts to develop and what language children use.
Yeah, so
Tattletale.
okay.
Like
Yeah.
tattletailing.
Actually, one potential inference which can be drawn from this kind of developmental hypothesis is that from 4 years of age, 5 years of age, children start to be interested in which cooperators are good cooperators, so that they start to be interested particularly in the reputation of people, and start also to monitor their own reputation and try to look very nice and competent.
I just wonder if I could ask you one factual question. Are you saying also that by the end of 4 years, then not only is their epistemic vigilance maturing, but that they're actually able to meta-represent the situation of being lied to? Because it sounded to in your interviews that they're also able to say, I mean, to understand fully and to be able to discuss with you the fact that they're being lied to.
It's not an open-ended interview. I'm asking very precise questions. So I'm saying, did a frog lie or did it make a mistake? And the child has to make a choice between both alternatives.
But they well understand what is meant by saying this frog lied.
The data suggests that by 5 years old, they do understand that.
And therefore they can meta-represent, we could say. They can meta-represent the situation of life.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. It's very important because it links up with the paper I want to give next week.
Piaget showed that in 1932, that they better represent lie.
At 5.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, where does the 4 to 5 years children are suddenly like independent thing come from? Is that a specific? I don't, because personally, is that something all kids become independent between 4 to 5 years and start playing with other kids? Because that's kind of what you're suggesting, that they have some maybe environment where kids are playing tricks on them. But you know, kids do deceive when they're 2. Kids tease from when they're 8 months. And so if they go to daycare when they're 1 or 2, they'll have the same kinds of experiences.
We don't deceive it.
You don't?
But that's the baby guys.
Well, I think Mascaro done some work on that, so it's more observational. And the other question I have, I think there's some work also where kids could differentiate intentions to pretend and lie by 3 years.
Yes, yes.
So I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that all this relates to the. Okay, there is early sensitivity to deception. So I'm not claiming in any sense that everything appears at 4 years old and that there was nothing before. But actually, in the study you're alluding to, children are, for example, they have the perspective of the teddy bear who is lying. So they're seeing everything that teddy bear is seeing, and so on and so forth. So you could say that actually the cognitive resource investment, which enables children to actively resist deception, develops at the age of 4 and 5, but it does not mean that by the age of 3 they are not able to identify a lie. Okay, they may be able to identify a lie, but they can't resist it.
A couple of points in response to this. I mean, those numbers don't just come out of the air sort of theoretically as well. So if you look at foraging societies, the age of weaning is typically around 3 years. The interbirth interval is typically around 4 years because of some lactational amenorrhea, right? So that means basically that you know, mom's got a new kid to worry about by the time you're 4. You're off there, you know, on your own. So, right? Another, I hear sort of vaguely, I can't tell whether those are affirmations or objections. I hear noise.
Just go ahead. It's someone with an older sibling.
Dan and I have discussed this some, but I'd be interested in your perspective too, which is the epistemic vigilance argument, while internally coherent, is at odds with the importance of gullibility for cultural transmission. Right? So if one takes, for example, George and Gergie's stuff about ostensive cues, right? Is it sufficient when you're 5 that someone says, hey, look, here's information which you should accept and generalize, right? Or are you constantly suspicious about others' intentions? Those two things are running into each other in general, right? Now, it could be that, in fact, that's the task of the learner, is to figure out when you should be gullible and when you should be vigilant. But it's not obvious to me exactly what the discriminating criteria are going to be, right? I mean, why not think, well, my parents are the ones who speak right and everyone else speaks wrong, right? Because I know my parents, have my interests at heart, as it were. Right?
That's not a good choice, because you're going to miss a lot of good information. You really have to try to calibrate your trust in an optimal manner. So a lot of people with whom you interact on a regular basis and towards whom you may accept the regular kind of information they give you. If you start talking about a completely different topic, you might become vigilant. So basically, it's so important to filter information to be trustworthy when you should and not when you shouldn't, that we may expect a number of mechanisms to have evolved for that purpose, and epistemic vigilance to take quite different form. So in a lot of cases, by default, a lot of people you can trust by default on the topics on which you normally interact.
Yeah, I would add to that.
But I think the gullibility argument is mistaken.
Well, I would add to, as a complement to what you said, I would say that the conformism, that is the tendency to accept information that is widely dispersed, is common in the population, is consistent with this argument, because it's extremely unlikely that there is a mass conspiracy to deceive, right? That everyone actually doesn't believe this except when they're around you, and then they say that in order. So a simple heuristic is just, if the information seems widely accepted, then it's probably.
Right. And that's not gullibility, that's a different criterion. Trusting the majority makes sense, as you said.
Just one more minor point, which is I would take the poisoning and food neophobia argument out entirely, because that neophobia is happening even when the mothers are the ones providing the information, right? So here, Junior, try this, try this. The kids still, you get the same trajectory with regard to neophobia. So it isn't a question of suddenly becoming vigilant, and that's why you're not accepting food that you previously would accept. I think it has much more to do with the indiscriminate nature of mouthing behavior early in life, and then the subsequent discrimination that happens later.
Okay, but that was just an analogy, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's incorrect.
I think we've overshot by 5 minutes, so we thank Olivier.